Hi everyone and welcome to the second part of Aron Nimzowitsch, my system. The customary quote, play to play well and not to win. Since I've dared to write my name with the quote, I feel it warrants an explanation. Some years ago, I used to trade in commodities, and in those days, I came across a quote which was, trade to trade well and not to make money, which I transformed into the version you see in the video. Although easier said than done, I believe that in order to play our strongest chess, we need to be free from the shackles of outcomes in our games. Just a little something to contemplate on. Now, a brief review of the first part, which included an introduction on Aron Nimzowitsch and my system, in which we started chapter 1 on the center and development, and discussed some concepts explained by Nimzowitsch in it regarding the strategic advance of troops, pawn moves as an aid to development, and that the key in open game is speed in development. So now, moving further into the book, Nimzowitsch discusses the concept of being ahead in development as an ideal to be aimed at. He writes, if I were running a race with someone, it would be, to say the least, inopportune were I to throw away valuable time by rubbing, say, a smut off my nose or blowing your nose. Although I must not be considered as criticizing that operation in itself. If, however, I can induce my opponent to waste time by some similar action, I should then get an advantage in development over him. Explaining in chess terms, Nimzowitsch writes that the repeated moving to and fro of the same piece would be described as an action of this kind. Accordingly, we force our opponent to lose time if we make a developing move which at the same time attacks one of his pieces which he has already moved. This very typical situation arises in the following illustration, where we have e4, d5, the Scandinavian defense. E takes on d5, queen takes on d5. And in this position, white has the developing move knight c3, attacking the black queen, which has already moved once and will have to move yet again to avoid capture. Here, Nimzowitsch discusses the concept of exchange with the resulting gain of tempo. He writes, the moves just given show in a very compact form a maneuver which we may call a compound one. For why do we take the black pawn with e takes on d5? The answer is to entice the piece which recaptures it onto a square exposed to attack. This was the first part of the maneuver. The second, knight c3, consisted in the utilization of the queen's position, which is in a certain sense compromised. The compound maneuver which we have just outlined is one of the greatest value to the student, and we proceed to give a few more examples. And here he gives another illustration to explain the same concept, where we have d4, d5, c4 and knight f6, the martial defense. C takes on d5, and now the two variations given by Nimzowitsch are queen takes on d5 followed by knight c3, developing a piece and gaining a tempo in one move on the black queen. And if instead knight takes on d5 here, then simply e4, getting a strong pawn center and gaining a tempo in one move on the knight, which will have to move again. Nimzowitsch writes, so that in either case white with his fourth move will have made a developing move of full value, which black will be forced to answer by wandering about. But perhaps the beginner may say in his heart, why should black recapture? Many a skillful businessman displays in chess an altogether unnatural delicacy of feeling. He does not recapture. But the master unfortunately knows that he is under compulsion. There is no remedy for it. He must recapture, else the material balance in the center would be disturbed. It follows from the fact that this is compulsory that the capture retards for the moment at any rate the enemy's development, except in the case when the recapture can be made with what is at the same time a developing move. Nimzowitsch gives another example here with e4, e5, f4, the king's gambit, knight f6, f takes on e5, and knight takes on e4. Nimzowitsch comments, forced, otherwise black would be a pawn down with no equality for it. So now knight f3 to prevent queen h4 check, knight c6 and d3, on which Nimzowitsch comments as the logical complement of the exchange f takes on e5 earlier. Knight c5, d4, knight e4, d5, and after knight b8, white will have the opportunity of gaining more tempi by either bishop d3 or knight d2, on which Nimzowitsch writes, the latter contingency must be carefully weighed. The exchange of the time-devouring knight at e4 for the newborn white knight at d2 means loss of tempo for black, since with the disappearance of the knight, there will vanish also the tempi consumed by him. That is to say, there will be nothing on the board to show for them. When a farmer loses a sucking pig through illness, he mourns not only the little pig, but also the good food he has gambled on it. Since the black knight consumed 5 tempi, moving 5 times, only to be traded off the board. Moving further, Nimzowitsch writes that an intermezzo or an in-between move is possible in the maneuver exchange with gain of tempo. He gives an illustration where we have e4, e5, f4, and now d5, the Falkbeer counter gambit, which is sort of like a mirrored version of the Albin counter gambit. E takes on d5, queen takes on d5, knight c3, and queen e6. Nimzowitsch writes, the exchange maneuver f takes on e5, queen takes on e5 check comes into consideration for white, since the square e5 must be looked on as an exposed place for the black queen. However, after f takes on e5, queen takes on e5 giving check, and white is apparently not able to make use of the position of the black queen. In reality, however, the check can only be regarded as an intermezzo or in-between move. White simply plays bishop e2, where queen e2 is still stronger. But bishop e2, and after all gains tempi at the cost of the black queen by knight f3 or d4 later. Bishop g4, d4, and not knight f3 because of bishop takes on f3, and no tempo is lost since the black queen need not move. So d4, bishop takes on e2, knight takes on e2, queen e6 and castling. And white has 5 tempi to the good. Both knights and a rook are developed. The pawn at d4 occupies the center and the king is in safety. Whereas black can show but one visible tempo, namely the queen on e6. And this tempo too will later on be doubly or even triply lost, since the black queen will have to shift her ground more than once. She will be chased away by knight f4 or other moves, so that white's advantage is equal to at least 5 tempi. Exchange, intermezzo, gain of tempo. The exchange and the gain of a tempo are related. The intermezzo alters nothing. Next, Nimzowitsch discusses the concept of liquidation with consequent development or disembarrassment. He writes, when a merchant sees that his business is not succeeding, he does well to liquidate it so as to invest the proceeds in a more promising one. Translated into terms of chess, I mean by this that when one's development is threatened with being held up, one must adopt a radical cure and on no account try to remedy matters by palliative or mild measures. Nimzowitsch explains this concept with an illustration in the Scotch game opening, where we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4 and d5, on which Nimzowitsch comments, black's last move is questionable, for the second player should not at once copy such an enterprising or aggressive move as d4. E takes on d5, queen takes on d5, knight c3 and bishop b4. For the moment, black has been able to hold his ground. The black queen has not had to move away. But after bishop d2, black would still appear to be in some embarrassment, for the retreat of the queen, who is now again threatened, would cost a tempo. The right course, therefore, is to exchange with bishop takes on c3 and bishop takes on c3. Wholehearted liquidation. And now, with the same idea, e takes on d4. Black has no time for moves such as e4 or bishop g4 here in the development stage. So e takes on d4, knight takes on d4. Black can now proceed with his development with knight f6 and has relieved the tension in the center and is in no way behind in development. The relief of tension in the center taken with the exchange is a main characteristic of complete liquidation. Nimzowitsch then gives another illustration to explain the same concept of liquidation, where we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4 and d5. He writes, here white can also embarrass his opponent by bishop b5. Underdeveloped as he is, black sees that he is seriously threatened with knight takes on e5 in the coming move. What is he to do? The protecting move bishop d7 is here as inadequate as bishop g4. Both these moves have the common failing that they do nothing towards relieving the tension in the center. Bishop d7 loses after e takes on d5, knight takes on d4, bishop takes on d7 check. queen takes on d7, knight takes on d4, e takes on d4, and queen takes on d4, where black loses a valuable pawn. While bishop g4 could here be answered by h3, in this case a forcing move. Bishop takes on f3, best to do it while he still can. If instead bishop h5, then g4 followed by knight takes on e5. So bishop takes on f3, queen takes on f3. From here the queen exercises a decisive influence on the center. Knight f6, e takes on d5, e4, otherwise black loses the e pawn. Queen e3, queen takes on d5 and c4, with decided advantage to white as black's game is insecure. Nimzowitsch continues, relatively best for black would have been immediately e takes on d4 here, and he liquidates thus, since his means do not allow him the luxury of maintaining a position of instability in the center. The continuation might be knight takes on e5, bishop d7, and black threatens to win a piece by knight takes on e5. As such, bishop takes on c6, bishop takes on c6, castling, bishop d6, knight takes on c6, b takes on c6, knight c3 and f5, and black has a satisfactory development and does not stand badly. If knight c3 here, then bishop b4, castling, bishop takes on c3, b takes on c3, and now perhaps knight e7, and after queen g4, castling, knight takes on c6, knight takes on c6, queen takes on e4. White, it is true, has a pawn more, but black seizes the king's file by rook e8, and now after queen f3, knight a5, the process of development is over and maneuvering begins, followed by c6 and the occupation of white's weak squares at c4 and d5 by knight c4 and queen d5. Black stands rather the better. Thus, timely liquidation has brought back into the right track the black player's questionable process of development. Nimzowitsch gives yet another example regarding the concept of liquidation in the Italian game Piano line, where we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, c3, knight f6, d4, e takes on d4, on which Nimzowitsch comments as the forced surrender of the center for black. C takes on d4, bishop b4 check, and bishop d2. Nimzowitsch writes, and now the black bishop is under the slight threat of bishop takes on f7 check, followed by queen b3 check, and so on. On the other hand, the white center pawns are very strong, and it is absolutely necessary to break them up. However, if at once d5, then comes e takes on d5, knight takes on d5, then bishop takes on b4, knight takes on b4, or even if black captures with the other knight, regardless, comes queen b3, and white stands rather the better. The correct play for black is therefore bishop takes on d2 check, getting rid of the threat to his bishop. Knight takes on d2, and now the freeing move d5, And after e takes on d5, knight takes on d5, queen b3, black makes himself secure by the strategic retreat knight e7 with about an equal game. White has the freer position, black has the strong point d5. Nimzowitsch writes the following: as we have seen, the exchange properly used furnishes an excellent weapon and forms the basis of the typical maneuvers which we analyzed above. Number 1, exchange with consequent gain of a tempo. Number 2, liquidation followed by a developing or freeing move. We must, however, give a most emphatic warning against exchanging blindly and without motive. For to move a piece several times in order thus to exchange it for an enemy piece which has not moved would be a thoroughly typical beginner's mistake. Therefore, only exchange in the two cases outlined above. Alright, we conclude the second part of Aron Nimzowitsch, My System here, and we shall continue onwards in the next one. Shout out to SmoothKiminal for subscribing to my Twitch channel last week. He's a viewer on my stream and an intermediate level player from Norway. Fellow streamer Skwerly once again for being awesome and gifting 4 subscriptions to viewers on my stream. The thekingcharlescav, who was the top chairer with 300 bits. simontwitchh, the second top chairer with 200 bits. Ginarook and Jacob G99 at third with 101 bits each. Jacob is also a viewer on my stream and an intermediate level player from Germany. Thank you for the kind support, everybody. Much appreciated. Alright, till next time, take care.